Hi, my name is Zen, and today I will show you how to model a simple form like this apple in oil paint. Modeling is the integral part of realism. It is a technique of creating the illusion of three-dimensionality. Everything that we see is illuminated by light. Our mind processes the light and rationalizes what we see. Before we begin with this apple, let's look at some pictures to understand how we can model it better. There are a few basic principles to understand before we begin. 1. Light travels in a straight line. Following this light logic, we can easily determine the shadow casted by the form. 2. Every object can be thought of as being made up of numerous facets or planes. And 3. As the direction of the plane on an object tilts away from the light source, its reflected value gets darker, so the plane and value become synonymous. Based on this light logic, our simple form can be broken into certain light and shadow zones. The highlight and light areas are the closest to the light. As the surface of the sphere turns, we start seeing its halftone. Then, as the surface turns away from the light, we start seeing the terminator line, which is the main division between the light and shadow. After the core shadow, we see reflected light, which is the light reflected onto an object from the surface it sits on. Then the cast shadow, which is an object's adjacent shadow. Then the mirror image, which is a reflection of the object itself. Now back to our apple. There are various preparations for form modeling, but for the beginning painting we will be using alla prima, which is a direct approach where paint is applied wet on wet without letting earlier layers dry. First, I outline the shape of the apple on a canvas. The cast shadow will be partially behind the apple because the light is illuminating the apple from the front left. We already know that the light travels in a straight line. This information helps us to determine the area where the light is blocked by the apple. I define the shape where the light terminates. On a sphere, this shape will be similar to a crescent shape. However, I split the crescent shape at the bottom to exclude the shape for the reflected light. In the beginning, I will be using Filbert bristle brush to block distant areas of color. Let's look at the paint I have on the palette. I have here titanium white, burnt umber, cadmium red medium, yellow ochre, sap green, yellow green, ultramarine, and ivory black. In this example, I do not use any medium. However, you need to have some mineral spirits and a rag to clean your brush between colors. First, I want to find the local color of this apple. Local color is the natural color of an object, unmodified by adding unrealistic light and shadow or any other distortion. If I offered this apple to you, you would define it as a light green apple, right? So this is its local color. I have a yellow-green on my palette, and I think it's pretty close to the local color of the apple. I apply local color in the area of halftone. Then I prepare colors on my palette for the light area of the apple and its core shadow. As the apple turns away from the light, our main goal is to drop the value and chroma while keeping the hue stable. To drop the value in chroma, I mix sap green with local color and add a little bit of ochre. The resulting color is the next step down from the local color. To go next step down brings us to the shadow area of the apple. I mix the same colors, but this time I add a little bit of ultramarine. For the darkest areas of the shadow, I omit the local color altogether, since it has some white in it, and mix sap green with ultramarine. To preserve the hue, I would add just a touch of ochre. For the light area, I just mix the local color with the white to bring the value up. I block the light area and the area of shadow. This process is a rough mapping of correct colors. Remember those planes I talked about? Now, this information is pretty useful to understand. I isolate the planes that have the same color. At this stage, it is important to start reminding yourself that you don't want to mix colors on canvas. You just lay down the colors you have on a brush. It is okay if it appears choppy. Now would be the good time to ask, how did I know what color to mix into the shadow color? The answer is in the color wheel formula. To create a shadow, I find the complementary of the local color and mix it in. Here on a color wheel, you can see that the color of the opposite side of the yellow-green is purple-blue. I would like to stay with the colder colors for the apple to be juxtaposed with the ochre background, so I choose ultramarine. When painting the background, don't go all the way to the apple. Leave just a little bit of space. Remember the mirror image we talked about? While painting the surface this apple sits on, it is important to remember that all colors interact with each other. So a little bit of green will be reflected onto the surface underneath the apple. When I paint the black background, I'm mixing in a little bit of red. Red is the green's complement color and will help to bring the green apple forward. Our next step would be to smooth out all the edges of this apple. It is a good idea to switch to a smaller synthetic brush at this point. It will allow a smoother application. I want to smooth out the terminator line. Instead of blending the two colors right on the canvas, I find the color in between those two colors and apply it right next to the terminator line. When using wet-on-wet technique, you want to apply paint in short strokes, so it doesn't mix in with those colors next to it. You load the brush with the color you want, then leave that paint on the canvas. Right before the paint starts mixing, you need to load the brush again. It is a good idea to wipe the brush in between, to prevent the color contamination on your palette. To smooth out the line between the light and the local color, you go through the same process, only now you find the color that works between those two. At this stage, you also want to define the edges of the apple. The area where the apple has a little dimple, with the stem coming out of it, is the area where the form curves in. The contrast would help to determine the sudden change in the direction of the form. The stem is a line made with burnt umber and a smaller line of light right next to it. The stem casts the shadow onto the apple. Remember to use the right hue when switching the surfaces. As I'm finishing up with the apple, I notice that it lacks some yellow in it. I can add some ochre over the areas of light. The area with the reflected light will have some more ochre in it. The colors interact. So, just like with the surface underneath the apple reflects the green, the apple surface will reflect the ochre. I use black right underneath the apple to intensify the contrast and to separate the apple from its shadow. Well, now you might be asking yourself, how this apple is going to help you paint faces or landscapes? Well, faces and landscapes follow the same light and form logic. It's just that there are more forms within them to analyze. Thank you for watching.